I think we should start by talking about my glasses, because they are a lot. By way of explaining, I live in a neighborhood called Jamaica Plain, and I live between a store that sells ice cream just for dogs and a preschool called the Rock and Roll Daycare. I don't know if you guys have met people who are into rock and roll, but they do need care all day. My point being, like, not all of us could get into the cast of Beetlejuice 2. I needed these. I gotta go outside and get attention from somebody. So I bought these. And they are very three-dimensional. They're a lot. The lady at my laundromat, who used to call me brave, I bought these glasses and she stopped speaking to me. But I do think they're right for me. Like, these glasses can gentrify a neighborhood before I even enter it. I'm a 53-year-old person. I'm a lady person, and I, like most people who play horrible noise music, I am not married, and I do not have any children. Sometimes people who I interact with who don't play weird sounds, they meet me and I tell them that I am not married, I don't have any children, I'm over 50, and they're like, well, what have you been doing all this time? And I do tell them the truth. I do. I confess. I tell them I've been trying to be cool. And I feel like it's working okay for me. Like, now that I'm over 50, like 1 in 3 of the dick pics I get is a drawing. Pretty awesome. Very nice of ESS to let me hang out in Chicago for the whole week. It's been super cool. A lot of my friends from home are like, what are you going to do for a whole week in Chicago? And I'm like, I'm going to visit every single Jewel Osco. I don't know if you guys know this, but when you're a middle-aged lady, they tell you, go someplace you're a 10. And in Jewel Osco, I am a 15. It's a nice place. Oh, I should warn you. I've been playing whatever this is around Boston for many years, and I mostly don't travel because I was too poor. That's just what happens sometimes. But I discovered after playing for like 20 years, I finally saw someone took video of me and showed it to me, and they were like, "This is what you look like when you play." And I realized that when I play, almost every single time, I just look the way I would look when I'm giving a blowjob, and it is so off-putting. It is so extremely off-putting, and I apologize. Just right out of the gate. I'm just going to put these microphones in my mouth, and it looks terrible, and you guys don't have to look. That's all I'm trying to tell you. I'm sure you can tell by looking at me that I've had a lot of weird jobs. For a while, I worked on an all Frank Sinatra radio show. It was 8 hours long. It was every Saturday, nothing but Frank. It was a very fun job. My job was they'd get more Frank ready, and they'd be like, here we go, and then I would press one button. It was very simple. After about 6 months of working at that place, the big boss, the producer, he came up to me and he was like, hey, Angela, we're going to stop paying you in money and start paying you in frozen steak. And I was like, this job is so Italian. Holy cow. I don't even know if I can work here. Maybe one of the best jobs that I've ever had actually was I was a bouncer at a dive bar. And I'm aware that I'm not a super threatening person. So sometimes people were like, how were you a bouncer at a dive bar? Like, what, some 300-pound, 6'5" dude who's super wasted, how are you going to handle that problem? And I was like, oh, the answer to that question is lying. You tell that guy it's 6 a.m., he thinks he has to go to work, and he's out of there. It's very simple. It's very low-key. It's very straightforward. Maybe, I think the reason I liked it so much, bouncing at a dive bar, was because my favorite people on earth to talk to are like 21, 22-year-old girls who just got wasted for the first time. Oh, my God. Oh, you should talk, like not all of you, but a lot of you should talk to those girls. They're so much fun, so much fun. It's like having a conversation with one of those old magic 8 balls, Like you don't know what's coming next. You just know they don't understand the future. It's so fun. And maybe the best time that I ever had when I was working at that place was a night when 2 really drunk girls met. And I'm sure you know the thing that girls do when they get really drunk is they make instant best friends. These 2 girls did it to each other, and they just started swirling together in like a whirlpool of alcohol. It was so lovely. And one girl had her phone out, and she goes, this guy, he wants to take me on a date in the woods. Other girl, perfect feminist, instantly supportive. She goes, oh, you go on that date. Sweetie, you could be the murderer on that date. Like, so sweet, just touching. Okay, you were nice enough to sit in the front. I'm going to give you a choice. Do you want to hear about the worst experience I ever had in therapy, or do you want to hear about a time that I got robbed? Robbed. That robbed is the choice. Okay. You guys have probably figured out that I have not been robbed a lot. The regular amount. However the amount is supposed to be, that's the amount, the right amount. I did work retail for over 30 years. That was one of the weird jobs that I had. I worked retail for a long, long time. And one of the superpowers of working retail is that sometimes someone comes into the space where you are and you can just spot what's going on with them. Like, you know way more than you should about that person. You can just spot what's happening with them. And I'm sure those of you who work in the service industry can do the same. One day, I was working on a register, and I was working in a very small space, smaller than like this stage space, really tiny. And this guy came in, and he was pissed. He was like pacing back and forth, which you can't do in a small space, but he was trying. And he was pacing back and forth, and I looked at him, and I realized, oh, this guy is in the wrong store. He has walked into a record shop, and he needs to be in a vape store where everything has the Godfather font on it. That's the store for him, and he just happened to come to the wrong one. It's this one. And I was like, okay, he'll be fine. And I went back to doing what I was doing at the register, just opening boxes, doing stuff, no big deal. And this is a true story, he came around the counter, came right up to me, and he pulled out what I can only describe as a comically large hypodermic needle, like this, like he was about to vaccinate some giants. Like, I don't know, did he follow a theater company? How did he get this thing? I don't know. I just know that you're not supposed to have one that big. And he pulled it out and he held it right up to my face, and then he screamed, "I have a needle full of AIDS!" And I was like, oh my God, I don't think that's how AIDS works. I was very stunned. I was so confused and didn't know what to do. And in shock, I looked down, and thank God I had been opening stuff to put on the shelves. I was just opening the mail. And so I looked down, and there was a box cutter in my hand, and I realized, oh shit, this guy just brought AIDS to a box cutter fight. Nice. And so I just went, bruh, and he ran away very, very fast. He ran away. That should be the end of the story. He just ran off, and it was fine. And then like 15 years went by. And then there was that part of the pandemic. I don't know how you guys feel about the pandemic, but there was that part of it where we thought the air was poison. Like, not today's kind of poison, like a different kind of poison. And I was terrified. I did not want to go outside at all. I did not know what to do with myself. And it was silent outside everywhere. There was no traffic. There were no people. I was living in an apartment with several roommates, and we weren't even seeing each other. We were just hiding in our rooms, freaked out. Nobody was sleeping. And so at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was scrolling on my phone, which I still do now, but I was doing it then too. And I was scrolling on my phone, and I got a notification that says, "Man robs municipal bus with hypodermic needle." And so I had the distinct experience of sitting up bolt upright and saying loud enough for all of my roommates to hear me, "Oh my God, that's my AIDS guy!" And I'm so proud of him now. Like, he is out here showing commitment. Just, I mean, yeah, it's to artisanal larceny, but it's commitment. And like, one of these days, maybe not in my lifetime, I'm pretty old, but maybe in some of your lifetimes, one of these days they're going to cure AIDS. And that guy is so specific of a person that the only thing he's going to be able to be is sorry. Because you're very nice. I was saying how I worked retail for a long time. And that, I wrote for a newspaper in Cleveland when I had never been to Cleveland. This is terrible to say out loud, but I had a job for a while sewing the patches on Bill Cosby sweaters. Not a great job. But definitely the weirdest of them all was working behind a register. One time I went out of town for a couple of days, and I had my friend Josh sub for me. Josh was amazing. Helped me out so much. Great guy. And Josh's way of getting things done was to leave sticky notes. That was his method of communication. And so I expected to come back and find hundreds of sticky notes, because I'd been gone for like a day and a half, and I was like, that's how it'll go. So I came back at like 2 o'clock in the morning, super late, and I was like, I just want to get this one thing done before I sleep, because I know tomorrow's going to be a long day. So I went to the place, and I was like, there was a box in the middle of the counter, and I was covered in sticky notes, and I was like, oh, that's probably cookies. Someone was probably nice and brought me cookies. Why wouldn't that happen? That's the most reasonable thing that could happen. And then I put my hand on that in that box, and it was a dead person inside. It was someone's ashes. And recently, someone gave the musical artist Pink their mother's ashes while they were on stage. And a friend of mine was like, that's so weird. And I was like, happened to me. Here's what happened. A guy had bought records for me, and he was apparently very excited about them, but he also happened to be terminally ill. And so after he passed away, he sent his girlfriend around the country by herself to his favorite places to give them some of his ashes. They didn't tell me they were coming. They could have given me a heads up, you know? And I appreciate that someone cared a lot, but I got to tell you, whatever records that guy bought for me, they were not that good. This one's got more. See if we can get it nice and high. There it goes. Thanks, you guys are so great.
All right. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. One more round of applause for Angela Sawyer for a wonderful set.
Thank you guys so much for being here, especially on a hot day.
Yeah. And for braving the high AQI and coming out for an outdoor gig.
That's right.
I maybe wanted to start our discussion by just kind of talking about some sound sources in there. I always like kind of just investigating some of what was going on there. I noticed the timers, and I'm going to come back to the timers in a moment, but maybe you could talk about some of the oscillating effects and things that you were using in there.
So I play mostly things that are broken and mostly things that you can buy at a store, which not everyone does, and that's fine. I learned to play music from listening to records more than I learned from a person. So I was always out to look for the set of things that I could do, but that I liked hearing, you know, and how many things could I put in that set and where could I find them? And I was somebody who I didn't get a chance to kind of apprentice with anyone. So my apprenticeship was at the dollar store. Whenever I had a bad day, I would go to the dollar store and I would just be like, I wonder what this does. And I would buy stuff and I could afford it because it was at the dollar store. And little by little, I ended up with a bunch of garbage. So I have a mixer that is plugged back into itself. And then that mixer, some of the outs from that mixer go through two different tremolo pedals that are hard panned. So that's what makes it bounce back and forth. But then I also put that back into itself, so it feeds back, and it's very... I basically tried to set up something because I wanted to play with people, but sometimes people didn't want to play with me back. So I tried to set up something that would play itself, and I wouldn't completely be able to control it. And then I would have to respond to it. And so I just ended up with a lot of things that interrupted themselves and me.
Totally. With the no input mixing board setup, I know that there's always, whenever you're dealing with feedback, there's like an extraordinary amount of randomness and you know, things to contend with where you can't always control, obviously, the pitch or any kind of rhythmic beating or anything, but how do you deal with the kind of like completely uncontrollable, chaotic nature of the feedback? Or is that really
you enjoy it?
The thing you're seeking? Yeah.
I mean, you learn if you do it all the time. You learn like, oh, this usually happens, and sometimes you do things and it doesn't come out the way you want. And usually, I think this is true for most improvised music. You're going to get like 75% of what you set out to get if you do it all the time. And you have done it enough where you're like, usually this is what happens when I do this. And then 25% of the time, it's just not going to happen that day. Like often, I often play in very small spaces. And so often I can get pops that will go around the space, just like a very hard pop that'll go around. But today, no pops. So today we were noisier, and that's just what happens. So you sort of like learn what your instrument does, but also you're coming up with how the instrument works as you go along. So it's just this constant process of being like, can you listen to what you've got and work with what you're given, just like you would if you're playing with a person? And can you then figure out a way to respond to that is interesting rather than just like bleh.
Mm-hmm. Totally. With some of the found objects, and you mentioned your process of going to the dollar store and finding various objects, do you set out with like a sound that you are seeking out that you would like to achieve with those objects, or is it a lot more just kind of gathering these things and then seeing what the craziest, sonic possibility is?
Some of each. Yeah. I definitely am someone who, like, I'm very judgy. I live in Boston for a reason. I'm a very judgy person, and so there are definitely textures that I'm like, ugh. The 60 cycle hum of a crate amp is, for many years, I was like, that's the ultimate bad move. And I think that's part of that is just taste. It's that process of like, you identify, you're like, oh, I like this, I don't like that. And little by little, as you kind of go around and be like, yes on this, no on this, yes on this, no on this, yes on this, no on this, you're defining for yourself how it works. You're defining what you think good is and what beautiful sounds like. And as you continue, you just keep redefining that. And you just don't tell anybody if you mess up. Except I tell people sometimes.
Yeah, so one question I had, we were talking last week about some of your sound sources and things that you integrate into the set and your setup. And you said something about specifically seeking out objects that don't have a musical purpose but are very, sonically oriented objects. And if you could maybe talk about how you kind of came across that or became fascinated by that aspect.
I think partly it's because I think partly I ended up there because I went to school for philosophy rather than for music. And I worked in record stores rather than having somebody teach me an instrument. So I was like, what are the, there's that famous quote, my roots are in my record player, the Evan Parker quote. But I was sort of like, okay, what's my, what are my sources? What can I find? And I was like, well, I might not have a fine instrument, but I have a lot of trash, and it's easy to get. So it's partly doing that search, but also like, for example, because I do stand up a lot when I'm not doing music, the number of minutes that things take is a very important qualifier. The ideas are timed and they come out in minutes. So I wanted something to interrupt me every 5 minutes, which is why I bought a bunch of timers. Because I was like, okay, I know I want to aim for this many minutes, and I know I want to think about it in chunks of certain minutes. But also I know that kitchen timers are never correct. They never tell you the time that is actually the time that you set, and none of them are the same. And so it's going to, part of improvising is you make a plan that you know you won't succeed with, and you just have to be okay with whatever comes out of that plan.
Yeah, that kind of you stole my next question.
Oh,
sorry.
I
was going to ask you about the timers and just kind of how that, maybe can talk a little bit more on how that shapes your approach to form, and like obviously time is one of the most important aspects of that, but like how you go into a music set these days, and how much of it, do you have a plan that you set out to execute, and then where that comfort level
there's a lot of choices, because it depends on who is going to be there. Hugely, the audience is a big part of it. I like to talk to the audience because I get used to doing comedy, but also there are audiences who want to see part of what I do, and there are very few audiences that want to see all of what I do. So I sort of understand, like, oh, this is an audience that would like this part, and this is an audience that would like that part. And, there's some, if I get booked to play a little gallery where people are playing improvised music, and especially in New England, where sets are very short as a rule. It's maybe not as bad as it used to be, but all through like the early 2000s and the 2010s, like if you played for more than 15 minutes, you were a jerk. It was just a jerk move. You were being an egotist of some sort. And many sets were like 9 minutes long, and and that's fine. That's just sort of the what worked in that community because of the way the people are in New England, which is they're horrible. You've met them. And so a lot of it is about interacting with who's going to be there and sort of figuring out how to, kind of walk through whatever that obstacle course is. And it's, I don't know, it's a weird... comedy is sometimes cool and sometimes not cool. A lot of people who, like, there's some people definitely who think that doing stand-up is like an outreach program for the deaf, and that's fine. I don't have that against anybody. And then there are a lot of comedy people who are like, what is that? You like Nirvana? What is that thing you do? And you can't even explain it to them. They have no context for it whatsoever. So I just say, well, close enough, And when I tried to figure out how to do both of them at once, at first I was like, oh, I spend a lot of time improvising. I'll listen to myself. And then I realized, like, oh, that task is bigger than I imagined it when I first started down that path. Like, trying to figure out how to talk and think about people's responses while you are also improvising sound is too many things at once sometimes. So I was like, okay, maybe I will come up with ways to stop one of those things and then start one of those things. And I was like, oh, that's something that I like doing anyway. I like things that interrupt themselves. So I thought about doing a whole section of things where things get interrupted, including me talking gets interrupted.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That kind of brings me to a thing I wanted to ask you about regarding integrating the comedy work into music performance, and how with comedy there's kind of a very obvious overt dialogue between performing and receiving the comedy, right?
Sure.
And with improvised music, a lot of times that aspect of it is very present, but not at all addressed or acknowledged, that you are actually sharing space with other people as you're doing it.
Yeah, which is fine. I like that we make room for that. They aren't, we were talking, Olivia and I were talking earlier this week about how the process of the things that you say to yourself in your head when you're improvising versus when you're doing comedy aren't that different. Usually the dialogue that you have with yourself in your head is like, pay attention, listen. Are you listening? Pay attention. Are you listening? Listen, come on. It's very, that sort of process is very simple. It's a very, I'm not doing math. And it's very much like, it's a puzzle that you're constantly trying to solve. Like, how do you start? How do you stop? Is it changing enough? Is it not changing? What was that? What do I do with that? That sort of constant response. And comedy is very similar in that it's, you're sort of like, what's going on over there? What does that person think? And it's very much about the response and sort of like getting a back and forth going. So I don't know. I think those processes are very similar, but obviously improvised music, especially noisy improvised music, it's not there to elicit laughter. Honestly, it's mostly there to creep people out. And I was like, well, if there's one thing I'm more talented at than making people laugh, it's creeping them out. I should be perfect for this. So trying to navigate what's similar and what's different is interesting to me. And so I keep trying various ways of attacking it.
Amazing. I wanted to back it up a little bit prior to the last 10 years that you've been doing a lot of comedy work and obviously for many, many years, as you talked about during the set, and also how I came to know you was working in the record business for many, many years. For those who aren't aware, Angela for many years ran what I consider to be the greatest record store that I ever had the privilege of entering and spending time in, called Weirdo Records in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And, some of my finest memories were being able to walk into the store, say hey to you, and be like, okay, I checked out this record and this record and this record this week, and I was really into these things.
What's the next
Point
one?
me in a direction,
yeah,
and you have a really, I think, unique and special, just massive knowledge and also specificity of so many different, whether obscure or not so obscure, fringy musics, right? And I guess I wanted to ask how your life as a performer came about. Was that a product of digging deep into many different records and wanting to participate in that, or was it the opposite? I think if you could talk about that part of your life.
So I think I got into experimental music by just being too much of a weirdo to be at normal stuff, which I think probably many of you feel the same way. Maybe not, but I hope so. So I was going to lots of little shows around town. There were, at that time, this would have been in the mid-1990s, and there was a place called the Zeitgeist Gallery that had shows 3-4 times a week, so I would go to all of them. And there were people who treated me like I was a person of the community or whatever. And then there were people who treated me like I was not a special person in the community because I was not cool enough or enough of a performer or whatever the qualification was that I didn't have. And I wanted to play, but I didn't know how to get that done. It was like how you get invited to a high school party, like I was like, how do people get this done, And so I remember very vividly the first people who, this guy John Voight, who's on an ESP record, and this guy Dave Gross, who ran a little festival for a little while and plays around town still, and ran a big band called Grizzler, which was like a 25-person band. Those were the first people who were like, oh, you don't need special qualifications. You want to. That's the qualification. Come with us. And you can try. John Voight literally showed up at my work and was like, hey, I'm about to go perform on a radio show and I don't have anything to do. Do you want to come with me and play with me? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, okay, let's go there. And we got in a car and we were on our way there. And he's like, what are you going to play? And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, what's in your bag? And I was like, tape. And he's like, you play tape. And I was like, okay. And I still play tape once in a while. It's great. So just, having people be like, no. The authenticity part of it, the serious part of it isn't real. Just come with us. And sort of being welcomed to that little island of misfit toys was super important to me. Part of the way that I did it is whenever anyone asked me to do anything, I always said yes, no matter how bad it seemed. They were like, do you want to play in the bathroom on the sink? And I was like, yes. And they were like, do you want to show up and play at 3 a.m. at somebody's bedroom? Yes. Like whatever they asked, I would just be like, you got it. I'm there. I'm in. And then eventually you've done those things a bunch of times. And so like I maybe don't have, there are skills that I don't have for sure, but if you need somebody to gargle Coca-Cola, I'm your lady. I've done that already,
Yeah, one thing that I heard in that and was thinking about was just kind of how, whether it's a scene or any kind of music community, particularly with weird improvised or non-improvised weird music, people take for granted the kind of the scene and the spaces that are made available and things that are made to happen, and that people forget that that's like a very active endeavor for usually a handful of people. And as someone like at the record store, the Monday series, which was a very long running series that would happen every week, where it was a very open space for anyone who was interested. And
I think the thing that you want to say about that series is that the record store that I owned, we would have had trouble fitting our 2 chairs in it. It was so tiny. The movie theater bathroom is spacious by comparison. It was a tiny, tiny, tiny store. But the shelves are on wheels. So on Mondays, I would just shove the shelves to one side, and whoever, I would just book somebody for every Monday, and it would just be one act, so it didn't have to go on for that long. And for a while, my upstairs neighbor was very upset and would call the cops every week. And usually I would just say, okay, just don't play for like 10 minutes. And I'd move the shelves back and the cops would come. And I'd be like, in here? Really? And then after a while, they stopped coming when she called. So we got away with a lot.
That's amazing. For someone who has been in Boston for,
forever,
for a long time, and Boston is, a very wonderful, interesting place.
I love the spin on that wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And there are, the way that I have felt about it for many years is that there are kind of cycles and generations of people that come through, and activity, waves of activity will happen, and then someone who's making a lot of shit happen will leave town, and then someone else will come, and I guess kind of circling back to that idea of actively creating space for things to happen and for a community to develop. Like, could you describe what that time has been like for you in a challenging place like Boston?
I love Boston, but I do think that it is a town full of the worst human beings. It is it's hard to explain. It's a town that is really good at, it's a good town for records. It's a very good town for ideas. It's a very, there's not a lot, because there's so many schools, people don't mind intellectual or abstract stuff. That's very welcome there. And I like that about it, and I fit in there. It's also a town of very angry people, and I fit in with that too. So I am supposed to live there for sure. But it's a very bad town for venues, and forever, I would be like, oh, why can't so-and-so come here? Why can't this happen here? Why can't that happen here? And it would be like, well, because we have one bar. And they only do stuff on, early Thursdays or whatever it is. And I do think that there's room for you, whoever you are, in the underground music community. But at the same time, right along with that, I do think that it's a difficult community, for sure. For example, sometimes comedy people will be like, oh, comedians, they're all racist, they're all sexist, they're all jerks to each other, they're all so mean and this and that. And I'm like, oh, have you guys met record collectors? By comparison, comedy is extremely diverse and very open-minded and super welcoming.
speaking of the comedy thing, I just wanted to ask you, and I'm going to ask one more question, and then maybe if there are one or two audience questions, if you were down, we could take a couple.
Sure.
And I just wanted to ask how the comedy part of your life came about. Like, what was that?
I think it's honestly.
Like?
I think it's that. I worked in record stores around Boston for a long time, and then I owned one for a while. And while I owned it, I also wrote like liner notes and music criticism for a living, and that is another job that you can't get paid for and will ruin your life. Don't do it. And while I was trying to keep afloat with all that going on, so I wrote record reviews of all of the records that I sold at the store. I would write a review of every record that came through. And so over the course of 10 years, I wrote literally like 18 or 19,000 record reviews. It was just like what I did all day, every day. And at the end of 10 or 12 years of that, I was super burnt out. And I just couldn't think straight anymore because the part of my brain that was like categorizing music was so overdriven that I couldn't hear correctly anymore. I was like ruining my ear, I think. And nothing seemed fun. And about that same time, I discovered, like I was saying, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I discovered that there was this island of misfit toys, this sort of alternate family that you could have that was the improvised music community. And I was all in, and I wanted to spend all of my time inside that community, as far down the bottom of the rabbit hole as I could possibly get. And I did for a long, long time. And then I realized that I didn't know what like the sun looked like or how to sit on a couch, and I hadn't lived entirely well. And around the same time that all those thoughts were occurring, I discovered that there was another island of misfit toys that I had not visited that was also an art. And I was like, oh, I should check that out. And so I literally looked in the paper and I saw an open mic it was a tiki room that was inside.
Was it the Howard Johnson at
yeah,
Fenway?
Yeah. It was a tiki room that was inside a Chinese restaurant. Those aren't the same thing. And that was inside like a baseball place. And that was inside a hotel for ladies of the night. And that was inside the baseball part of town. And I was like, that's too many things. I should go to that place. So I went, and I got hooked immediately because I realized very quickly that comedy and improvised music have a lot in common. And also that I hadn't seen that many weird people do weird things in a long time. And I was like, there's another island over here. I got to check it out.
Amazing. Are there any questions from the audience that we can take? And just, if you have a question, please say it loudly, and I'm going to repeat it for the recording for the archive's sake. But anyone? Yeah?
I think I like the snobbish audio purist thing, and you combine the real, let's call it sleazy, verbal comedy itself. I wouldn't normally take any interest in. And I thought it was like the audio became the soundtrack for some kind of stage film event. The ambience and what happens in space. I wondered if all of your shows are like that, or if you have a kind of streamlined audio file.
Yeah. If I could
Please
translate that in for the recording, the question has to do with how much, I think maybe about the blend of comedy vocabulary on top of experimental music and this kind of sonic landscape that you laid down. And the question is, are all of your sets like that? Do they include those aspects, or is there a wide variance?
So the simple answer is no. Sometimes I just play sounds, and sometimes I just talk, and sometimes I for a long time I did a lot of not words vocal things. And then I got ill for a while, and I lost some of the top end of my voice, so I talk more because of that. But I do really care a lot about the movement of foreground and background when things are happening, especially in playing music. And I always, when I play music, one of the things I'm most interested to do is move the background to the front and then move the foreground to the back and see if you can keep moving them around. I like that a lot. And I, like I said, I went to school for philosophy, and my favorite philosophy guy is Edmund Husserl. And that's part of what he's about, is whether you're attending to the foreground or the background. And to me, that's one of the, we're talking about how time is very important to music, but that's the space. That's the part that gives you the sense of space, is whether something is the focus or not the focus. And I love turning it on, turning it back off, turning it on, turning it back off. So I do always try to keep that happening, even if whether I'm talking or not.
Amazing. Any other questions? Yeah, sure.
So I was kind of curious, since you've started down this path that you're on, and you kind of started to explore and find this gear that you've accumulated, do you find inspiration-wise now that you kind of are in that same place where you started from, you find inspiration from the same things, or are there any things that have kind of influences? It could be music or film or whatever it is that kind of changed your trajectory dramatically that you can think of off the top of your head?
Yeah, if I could repeat that question.
Please.
Are there influences outside of, explicitly music or experimental sound that have shaped the way that you interact with your instruments and shaped your approach as a musician and an improviser?
Sort of. I don't know if you guys have this experience, but when I first got interested in experimental music at all, or just in music in general, every new thing that I discovered, it just ripped the top of your head off. The first time I heard Pierre Henry, I was just blown away. And I was I need to spend all of my time paying attention to this guy. And I spent a lot of time paying attention. And the first time I heard an Isler record, I was just holy shit, what is even happening? And you want to figure it out. And I think a lot about a good record. We were saying this earlier this week. A good record is like a pair of sunglasses with a particular tint to them. And once you get to know how a record works, how it meets its goals, whatever goals it has that you can think of, you kind of digest that like a detective. You sort of reverse engineer it, put together the clues, and then you have that pair of sunglasses with that particular tint, and you can look at whatever you want. So you start looking at yours. I went and looked at kitchen timers in Walmart, and I was but it's whatever is in your life, you can start looking at it with those glasses. And those big experiences where you're you find a whole new color of glasses are super important. That just blows you away. But then after a while, it's kind of like when you're married to someone. It's not that you're not still learning about that person, and it's not that it doesn't mean anything, but the change in the tint isn't as big. The amount of color change that you're going to get with every new pair isn't going to be as wide because you've tried on so many sets of glasses. So there are definitely records that still knock me out, and I'm I got to listen to that many, 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 many times until I understand until I guess what that person was thinking. And there's songs that I get super excited about and have to listen to over and over again. I get obsessive over them. But I don't know if I find new colors as much as I used to. And I do sometimes still, one of my very favorite records is the record Jan and Dean Meet Batman. I'm a big fan. And, when I was 20, I wrote a big article about it because I was very excited, and I was like, everyone needs to know about this record. And when I was 30, I learned to play some of the songs, and now I'm 53, and I've investigated that record heavily. But every once in a while, I still put it on, and I hear something I haven't noticed before, and I'm like, oh my God, it's a record that makes sense to me now, and that was what I liked about it so much when I first heard it, was I couldn't figure out what the hell they thought they were doing, But every once in a while, I still notice something that I've never noticed before, and I'm like, still, I haven't figured it out, And then I have to go back and think, like, how can I incorporate that? How can I turn that lens on what I see and kind of look through it again?
Amazing. Any other questions? No? All right. Oh, yeah. Sweet. Jim.
So did you just get burnt out on the record stores?
I did.
The question is, Angela, did you get burnt out at the record stores?
I sure did. I got super burnt out, and so in 2015, I used to own about 20,000 records, and in 2015, I sold most of them, and I got a job as a secretary. And I did that for a little while, and that's where I worked during the pandemic. And now I have a really normal job where I type doctors' names. It's very easy, and I love how easy it is. And every day, I mostly work at home, which is great. And every day I make a meeting with Sarah, who doesn't exist, and then I play my favorite Django Reinhardt songs on the ukulele during that meeting.
It's an incredible way to live. We love it. One more time, thank you, Angela Sawyer, for coming out. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, ESS. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me so much.
Anytime, Angela. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.